Everybody, welcome to Hollywood Week for the Dollar Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and we have a list of Hollywood big shots that are on the show. We're so glad that they took the time to speak to us. The first one is an absolute comedy legend, and I don't say legend easily. This is a legend. This is Bruce Vilanch. Bruce Vilanch is one of the funniest people in the world. He has written for numerous television shows, Brady Bunch Variety Hour, the Star Wars Holiday Special, Ice Pirates. He's written for Barbara Streisand, Bette Midler, you name it. All the celebrities go to him for comedy advice, and he does a phenomenal job with it. Some people might know him from Hollywood Squares. He is a wonderful guy, talking about his career, how he got started, and it was an absolute honor to speak to him. So, without further ado, Bruce Vilanch. I'll talk about none other than Bruce Vilanch. Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. On a Monday, why not?
There you go. So let's
avoid
start.
Everything.
At the very beginning, as a child, what were your earliest comic influences?
Oh, I like the fat guys. I went after Jackie Gleason. I'm very old, so Jackie Gleason, Zero Mostel, William Bendix, who was the life of Riley. I liked the fat guys who could sing and dance and were graceful. So they were the initial influences, and then everybody I saw. Sponged on with everybody I saw.
So
I couldn't get enough.
How do you
But
make
it was an era of those guys on television who had real personalities. They were vaudevillians. They could do everything, and that I like those guys, Sid Caesar and those types.
How did you make the decision to pursue a career in writing in Hollywood? How old were you when you decided that this is maybe the decision you wanted to make?
Well, I was a child actor. I was never a child star, or we'd be in rehab having this conversation. Except I used to say that, and then I found a picture of Ryan Gosling, Justin Timberlake, Ariana Grande, and Britney Spears, and I thought, well, they all turned out okay. Well, three of them. I mean, the other one is a big star, but with lots of mishigas in her life.
Mhm.
But so I thought I really have to retire that joke. But I was a child actor, and I aged out of child acting because I had a deep voice, and I was big, and I looked way older. So suddenly I was playing character parts, and I wasn't getting cast because I was not authentic. I was opposite actors who were the real deal. So I began writing, and I discovered I had a talent for that. It was in high school, I think, that I discovered it, and my parents enabled it because they always said. You can be an actor if you want to be. They loved it because they saw I was happy when I was acting and making faces, and they were very smart. And but they encouraged the writing thing because they thought, well, you could. That's a fallback because you could write for newspapers because newspapers will never die. They weren't terribly prescient about the coming Intel age, so. That was when I started doing it, and I began getting work. So that's always a clue. When people hire you, that means that you're doing something that's correct that they like.
This is a sort of a nerdy question, but you've written for so many people, for so many wonderful sketches and stuff like that. Do you almost have to do research about the person because you can write the greatest joke in the world, but the person isn't buying into it, or the person isn't delivering it a way that you had that would make it work?
Sure.
It's not going to
Sure,
work.
of course, you have to do due diligence. You have to get a person's rhythm, a performer's rhythm, in your mind and write whatever.
Kind of froze up.
I said you have to tailor it like a dress.
Right.
And Bob Mackey, who's a friend and colleague who I've worked with for years, designs dresses, and he would not put Cher in the same dress as he would put Lizzo. Right. Those are two different body types. And so you have to study who you're working with and tailor it literally to whatever that person does.
So would you sit down with these folks individually and go over some things you've come up with and ask them if they're comfortable with it?
Yeah. Well, first you do your homework. First and you write whatever the assignment is, and then you sit down with them and go over it. Ideally, sometimes with certain comics, like with Joan Rivers, she'd say, Yeah, just send me the stuff. And this is going way back to where you could, leave it on an answering machine.
There a lot of pressure? Did you feel a lot of pressure on you for these jokes and these shows that you were a part of that if it doesn't go as maybe you planned, it might be not be so great for you? Did you feel a lot of pressure?
Sure. Because they all want to blame the writer. There's like, there's a famous joke. It's too long to go into now, but it ends with, "Well, don't blame me. I didn't write this shit." I mean, they do that all the time, and you hear them sometimes on shows. If it's a live show and it doesn't get the laugh they were expecting, they'll say, "Well, I told them that wouldn't work." I mean, the guy who got into trouble with that was Joe Coy on the Golden Globes
Mhm.
because he was not really he had gotten the gig 10 days ahead and he wasn't really up well prepared for it. And he did a bunch of stuff I don't think he had confidence in. And when it didn't work, he said, "Yeah, I told him that wouldn't work." Yeah. So, I mean, definitely like throwing the writers under the bus to endear you.
Who are some folks that you really felt, a synergy with that you guys were bouncing ideas off each other and it just kept going and working so well?
Well, the first one was Bette Midler. That was only 55 years ago. And we still do that. We still have that affinity. And the people, there was a documentary made about me about 20 years ago called Get Bruce,
Mhm.
made by Harvey Weinstein, who never laid a hand on me. Hashtag why not me?
Oh,
But it highlighted Bette and Billy Crystal, Whoopi Goldberg, Robin Williams. Those were the four big ones that gave interviews
mhm.
that participated in the willing deconstruction of their comedy careers, and a lot of other people. I mean, I have you develop an affinity for people. Uh, Sometimes you don't. I mean, sometimes it just doesn't happen. But even the people who, well, I met Steve Martin early on, and we're not alike. Except, I mean, he's a genuine oddball, but
Mhm.
he's a much more restrained individual than I am.
Mhm.
And so but it seems it works. But I still do stuff for him, so it works.
When you're writing for a large scale television show, it's going to reach broad audience. Do you sort of want to tailor it so that, you know, every American can sit and watch it and get the humor and people don't get offended, or do you try to, put little points here and there?
Well, it's kind of impossible to do that. I mean, you take the assignment at hand. I mean, you don't want to piss anybody off.
Right.
That's kind of the first rule. You have to approach it from the negative aspect
Mhm.
because you can't please all the people all of the time. I think Abraham Lincoln was the one who said that initially. But I mean, odds are that if somebody comes on who they don't like, nothing the person's going to say is going to matter to them. So,
Right.
and especially now where everything is so fractured, where everything's divided up right and left, and it's a minefield. And also added to that, there's this tremendous sensitivity everybody developed during Me Too
Mhm.
and woke and George Floyd, and so you never know when you're whose toes you're stepping on. Well, you generally can figure it out, but sometimes it even takes me by surprise that somebody was offended by something because you feel like, oh my, this is really whack. But it happens, so I think you just have to. It's not for the faint of heart.
I would say there has to be a sense of, uh, bravery in some ways to sort of put yourself out there and put your humor out there, knowing that, like you just said, it can be a bit of a minefield.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, but that's also the fun of it. I mean, if you, I mean, we're all attracted to this by what I call the imp of the perverse.
Mhm.
I mean, I think when you started out, you realize it's an improbable career, and if you wind up having a success at it, it is a lot of it is by chance. I mean, luck, of course, the classic definition is preparation meets opportunity.
Mhm.
But you could. There are a lot of people who are well prepared and doing it, but they're not. They just don't aren't particularly funny, or they don't have a a view of the world which translates to other that other people can get. You just never know. So if you're scared or unsure of that, you probably should back away from it and go to something that will give you less agita.
Mhm.
But the people who are attracted to it are the ones who just don't care. They will assimilate the agita. They will become the agita.
At what point did you feel you made the right career choice, that you felt confident in what you were doing and that you were good at what you were doing?
That's a very good question. Does anybody feel confident in what they're doing? Uh, I think, well, in one practical way, when my father used to do my income tax. He was a doctor, but he was very scientific, and he didn't trust other tax preparers. He had studied tax law. I don't know why, but so he would do my taxes. And one year, I was a couple of years after I moved out here, I was writing the Donnie and Marie show, and they were paying me a lot of money. And he said to me, "You have to get a professional to handle your money, your taxes. It's beyond my ken at this point." And I thought, "Oh wow," because he was a successful doctor, and we know they make money. So I thought, okay, that was kind of like a real validation,
Mhm.
not a kind of bullshit validation. So I guess that it was then where I thought, well, gee, I think I can make a go of this. I appear to have made a go of this to my father. And I mean, when you consider all the people who spend an entire life trying to get approval from their old man and never do, man, there it was. He laid it out for me right there. I was lucky.
That's pretty awesome. I want to talk about a number of the projects you worked on, but there are any projects that you don't get asked about that you really enjoyed working on that you feel like should get a little more of a spotlight on them?
You mean that I don't get asked that? I'm not exactly sure what your question is.
Projects that you worked on that you don't get asked about a lot that you really enjoyed
Oh, I
working
see.
on.
No, well, yeah, I mean, the reason I don't get asked about a lot of them is that they don't remember them, and that's why one reason I wrote this book, which is called "It Seemed Like a Bad Idea at the Time." I was doing podcasts like this, and people younger than you even were asking me about shows I wrote way before they were born,
Mhm.
and I didn't even realize that these shows had a life on the internet because
Mhm.
I never looked them up. But then I wound up saying, "Oh my God, they actually know the Star Wars Holiday Special."
Mhm.
Or the Brady Bunch Variety Hour. And I thought that's kind of a nice half-assed way to back into a memoir. So I wrote a memoir about the worst shows I ever wrote and how they lived and how I lived. I don't think I'll be doing a book about the best shows I ever wrote. Who cares about that? And they all know those, but it just seemed like perfect. Those were the shows they were ironically asking about, the failures, the colossal failures. So, but they, once in every other blue moon, somebody brings up some project that I've completely forgotten I did. Especially when you're promoting a book and you do a lot of interview kind of stuff, there are people who dredge things up that you're absolutely, as I say in the book, we thought all of these TV shows were buried. And it turns out that it was a very shallow pool, and they all bubbled up to the surface while we weren't looking. But that's the fault of the internet, That the internet, the great equalizer. You can find anything on there. It's all there, and it never used to be.
You mentioned one, and that's the Brady Bunch Variety Hour. And I think it's so intriguing because this was a television show, and these people were playing characters, and there was a story and stuff. And suddenly someone said, "Hey, let's get them singing and dancing," and have nothing to, there's no plot really. So folks who enjoy the show are going to be expected to enjoy seeing them doing skits and dancing.
Yeah.
What was your mindset being
Uh,
asked to write for that?
it was very strange. A guy named Fred Silverman, who ran at one point all three networks, and I was hoping he'd get PBS at some point, was at ABC at the time, and he had this idea for the Partridge Family,
Mhm.
which was a sitcom that shared an hour on Friday nights with the Brady Bunch. But the
Mhm.
Partridge Family was about a performing family. that toured in a bus and all that. And Shirley Jones was the mother, and she's of course a big Hollywood singer dancer. And David Cassidy, who was her stepson, was one of the Partridges. And so it was all about them, and their performing was natural. They didn't want to do a variety special. They didn't want to do a variety series. And so Fred said, maybe the Brady Bunch, because the Brady Bunch, the kids had an act which they took around to state fairs and things like that. And so we thought it wasn't much of a stretch to ask, Florence, who was a big Broadway Vegas star, to join in. Robert Reed, who played the dad, was another story. But and Ann B. Davis, who with the maid Alice, was an even weirder story, because she always had done Broadway, but never showed it on any of her television things. So he thought it would be a neat fit, but of course it wasn't a neat fit at all, because the Bradys were not performers. So the idea that the Bradys had a variety show where they were singing and dancing, I mean, was so surreal. In the pilot, it was like Cloud Cuckoo Land. They tried to follow. We had them try to fire their father because he couldn't keep up with the singing and dancing, because he was an architect. So and it was a running gag about how hard he was trying, and that kind of covered everything that Bob Reed was doing, because he really was not comfortable doing any of that stuff. He wound up kind of getting a kick out of it, but it took a while for him to really get into it. So it was one of those ideas from the 70s, and I always tell people, if you say you remember the 70s, you weren't there, because a lot of these ideas came up in a cloud of smoke. Although I think Fred didn't need any chemical substances to come up with these ideas. Like, he had a show called Pink Lady and Jeff, which was two Japanese girls who sang in harmony and were big stars in Japan, and a very physical Jewish comic named Jeff Altman. For some reason, they were hosting a show together. It was absolutely so. You'd think, well, this guy must have eaten 17 brownies before he came up with it. But no, nope, not Fred.
Is it a challenge when you have a cast that large, because there's a lot of different personalities, and there's going to be, everyone's going to want a little bit of a spotlight on them? How did you sort of divvy up the time slot to make sure, nobody got sort of pushed into the shadow, or did the thing just happen to happen?
Almost mathematically. We did try to showcase each kid. We didn't do a very good job with the two youngest ones, because they were well, it just wasn't their mien. I mean, they played along, but the ones who had a certain talent following, Maureen McCormick and Barry Williams, who were the two oldest, and well, we had fake Jan, because real Jan, Eve Plum, wouldn't do it, and so we hired fake Jan, Jerry Reichel. So we tried to showcase each of them if they didn't have a spot of their own, then we featured them like we always had a great big themed finale,
right?
The Wizard of Oz or Star Wars or something like that, and they would get to do some specialty thing in that. So it was all carefully calibrated, because we didn't want anybody to feel left out, and they all had their fans, So,
wow,
strangely enough.
When that show sort of wraps up, are you already looking to the next project, or did you have something already set up to go?
Well, we only did 9 of them, because it was on what they called a wheel, which was where you shared a time slot once a week with other shows. We shared it with the Hardy Boys, Mysteries, and Nancy Drew. So we were only on every third week, and then that was if we were not preempted by some other kind of ABC special. So we only do 9 of them, and it took us a couple of months to do those, yeah, so as it's winding down, you begin looking to the next thing. Actually, the next thing was Donnie and Marie. I went over to Donnie and Marie because Marie was turning 18, and they wanted to give her more adult material. These are Mormons who you're not allowed to mention coffee breaks, because they don't drink caffeine.
Right.
and a whole list of things you couldn't mention. I mean, the network censor had nothing to do because the scripts would go to the elders in Salt Lake City who would tell us what we could and couldn't do. So the network censor was reduced to counting strobe lights and the disco number because she didn't want epileptics to have seizures. Did you know that that occurred?
Not
An epileptic can have a seizure if the light is working at
right.
a certain level. These things I learned in show business.
I say that had to be frustrating for you, as a creative person. You're putting the work in, and
Yeah.
it's sort of hitting a wall, and it's like, well, what do you want then?
Well, it's always fun. I mean, anything that is commercially sponsored, you're going to run into that because first you're running into the network, which is afraid of what the sponsors will say, and then you're running into the sponsors themselves,
Right.
who have very definite opinions on what they want to say. I don't think this holds so much anymore because it's a 500 channel universe, and they're not reaching the kind of audiences they used to reach when they buy time on network television. Mostly, you find that they buy time on shows that reach their niche audience.
Mhm.
I'm fond of saying if you are selling tampons, you want to buy time on Riverdale because anybody who watches Riverdale is about to become a tampon user if they haven't already. And you want to get them for life, you know. So, except the gay guys who watch it because the guys take their shirts off by 10 after 8.
There you
So,
go.
but I mean, it's weird because shows are now created knowing that there are certain niches that will watch them and certain sponsors who want to attract that customer base. Now,
Where
when you work for Netflix or Amazon or Apple or any of them, that's not a worry because they are not sponsored. I mean, they are now they have a tier where the sponsors, but that's not where they make their big money. Their big money is made on people who subscribe because they don't want to have commercial.
That makes sense. Were you being pitched ideas from networks, or were you pitching ideas to networks, or was it a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. Yeah, you would go in with something and say, "Here's what we'd like to try," and but also if they had something they liked, they would come and they would say, "This, we think you could do this pretty well. Are you interested?" So
Right.
it did go both ways, which is probably the wrong expression to use, but
I want to chat a bit about the Paul Lynn Halloween special because that's also, like you said, found a life on the internet. Mr. Lynn had a very distinct personality and comedy stylings. Did you craft
yeah.
your jokes to fit his act, or was it sort of okay?
Well, I mean, he was unique, and you'd be crazy not to try and play to his talents.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, he was a flavor. I mean, he would come in and do one line, and it would be great, but it was hard to watch him for a long period of time, and it was hard to make him the center of something. That's why his sitcoms never worked, but that's why he was so big on Hollywood Squares, because he would have one line and tear the place apart. But it also worked on he did 7 different specials for ABC and they all had themes.
Mhm.
And they were looking for a holiday thing, and Halloween was perfect because he was already a witch. He was Uncle Arthur on Bewitched.
Right.
So the audience had already expected something from him that had seen on the other show. But I don't think anybody was expecting the thing to be as surreal as it was, because we had to appeal to every kind of audience. So we had a country hoedown in there.
Right.
You know, we had the witches, his sisters, the Wicked Witch of the West, and Witchy Poo. But we had Florence Henderson.
Mhm.
We had Pinky Tuscadero from Happy Days, Roz Kelly, Fonzie's girlfriend.
Mhm.
We had Tim Conway, who was a utility comedy player. And then we had Kiss. It was their first television show ever. And they drew a huge audience that would not have come otherwise, a younger audience. Actually, it was people who were young enough to also get a kick out of all the Halloween stuff.
Right.
So that worked very well. And Paul, of course, had no idea who Kiss was, but he liked when he saw Gene Simmons, and Gene Simmons came in at rehearsal and stuck his tongue out at him and said, "I want to meet him." And So I said to Gene, Paul would like to spend some time with you. And Gene said, it's the tongue, isn't it? Yeah, it gets them every time.
I mean, was Paul Lynde's character who he was when the camera's not on, or was there a bit of a separation?
He was much shyer in person. I mean, when the camera came on, he would have the authority, or when he was on stage, he would have the authority to do that. You know, his big breakout was "Bye Bye Birdie" on Broadway, where he sang "Kids," and he had his. He said, "I got no respect," and his little son said, "I respect you, Dad." And he said, "Who wants respect from a 10-year-old?" And you know, that was his kind of baseline, you know. So, but when he was off camera, he was nervous. He drank an awful lot, and he was you know he was kind of bitter because he wanted to be a big movie star,
Right.
like people he had come up with in New York, Mel Brooks and Woody Allen. But they wrote their own movies, and they were nebbishy and lovable. And he was the opposite of that. You got a kick out of him, but you weren't rooting for him because he was always a guy who was like standing in your way. No, you can't do that. No, you won't get the loan. You know, he was playing Mr. Negative.
Right.
So the Halloween special is one of the few times when he actually, to an audience, uh, talked about himself. We had a monologue at the beginning where he talked about how he hated Halloween
Right.
because he was a fat kid. I mean, I was fat, and he a lot of jokes like that. And for the first time, I saw he actually kind of was revealing a part of himself that he never got to reveal on other shows.
Wow. How many of these specials were done live? Were they all live, or were they some things pre-taped and then mixed in?
Well, they were not live
Right.
like you know, like award shows. But they were taped with a live audience
Right.
and edited, of course, after that. So most of the there was like the Brady Bunch. The finale was taped with live audience, and any musical thing we had, basically we had a live audience for part of the show, the sketches and things were taped like a TV show, but without an audience, and then we would roll them in to
Right.
the live audience so they would see what the show was about, and then we do certain things live. But the specials are pretty much the same. It really depended on each show. I mean, some shows were just done in a void with no audience at all,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of Barbra Streisand specials were done that way.
Okay.
And then she would do a concert special, which would, of course, be with a live audience.
Mhm.
But uh, it varied.
Was there ever, did you ever feel intimidated by who you had to write for that, yeah, yeah, like this might be, someone who might not get my humor or someone who might not go along with what I want to pitch?
Uh, you know, I wasn't intimidated for that reason. I was just intimidated because they were big stars. I mean, Lucille Ball and Vincent Price, who I adored, and Milton Berle. I mean, these were Bob Hope. These were all old school stars of my generation, and it was intimidating to just to go in there and say, "Jesus, I'm talking to Bob Hope." Bob Hope. And but I wrote for him for years of freelance. And he was a guest on a couple of shows that I did. Several I did some specials that he hosted actually. So that was the intimidating part. I wasn't afraid that I would step on toes or anything like that. I thought whatever happens, happens. I am who I am.
Right.
But it was intimidating to know that you were actually. I mean, I worked with Mae West at the end of her career, and George Burns, who were legends
Mhm.
towards the end of their lives, at the beginning of my career. So uh, that was the intimidating part. But once I actually, started working with them, that went away. Then it was just, hey, we're having a good time, or not, depending on
Right.
who they were.
I just had that question because you mentioned his name. Vincent Price sounds like one of the most fascinating people. The more I hear about him, that he was a very gregarious, kind guy, loved art. What was your experience
Yeah,
like working with Mr. Price?
absolutely. He was gregarious. Yeah, he told a lot of stories. He was well, Vince. He had a fascinating career because he was a character actor. He was a leading man who didn't really happen as a leading man, but he played a lot of. He was in a lot of movies where he was the other guy.
Right.
And then he became a kind of character actor because he was very good at that dark side. And then, of course, at a certain point, he bought into the parody of himself
Mhm.
uh, with all those the horror movies, the Hammer movies, where he was making fun of Vincent Price. That's the Vincent Price that Michael Jackson grew up watching
Right.
and used on the Thriller
Mhm.
soundtrack because that was a Vincent Price. But all those things were tongue in cheek. So on the Brady Bunch, he could play that Vincent Price character.
Mhm.
Off screen, he was married to this fabulous, sharp woman named Coral Brown, who was a terrific actress, probably best remembered for Auntie Mame. She played Vera Charles, Auntie Mame's best friend in the movie,
Mhm.
and they were a great couple. They were a real Renaissance couple. Yeah, he had a great art collection and was very very erudite, well spoken, and all that. And then he would turn on, Vincent Price.
Right.
Oh yes, good evening, hello. And it was always a treat. It was always a treat.
I of course have to ask about Star Wars because there's a documentary about it. It sort of
There
had
it
a
is, and I'm in
life.
it.
Yes. Um, I give you credit because this is a sci-fi movie that doesn't have much of a backstory. It's still relatively new, and you're being asked, could you turn this into a comedy and bring in different guest stars as well? Uh, what was step one in your plan to get this thing off the ground?
Well, that was never my plan. It was George Lucas's plan.
Hmm.
He had 10 stories, and he was selling them all off. And he was about to start shooting in 3 or 4 months' time. The Empire Strikes Back. So this was the second movie, or as we now know, it was number 5 in the canon.
Hmm.
So he wanted something to keep stirring the pot, and because Star Wars had been a year and a half earlier, and he didn't want the flame to go out
Hmm.
because he had a year and a half before the Empire would be released. So he had this one story he sold to CBS as he thought an original musical.
Hmm.
They never thought that. They thought a variety show. I don't think George, if he'd paid any attention to what variety shows were, would have done it, would have at all. But I also, it was odd that he sold an original musical that starred the Wookiees,
Hmm.
who cannot sing or dance or cross the room without knocking into something. And all they do is, and so everything had to be translated. And so it was handy because we had to bring in a lot of guest stars just to translate what the Wookiees were saying
Right.
because we couldn't use subtitles, which is ironic because now all the Star Wars movies are loaded up with subtitles. And so those were the weird parameters we were handed.
Hmm.
When they pitched it, when they called me and said, we'd be interested in doing this, I thought, oh, Star Wars, how could I say no? I mean, I wasn't like the Star Wars crazy person. I just thought, oh, this is a big deal in the zeitgeist. I have to be a part of this.
Right.
And friends of mine were producing it. Um, Ken and Mitzi Welch and Joe Layton, who were all Broadway, and Ken and Mitzi did the Carol Burnett show, and Joe and I had done Broadway, and so I thought this would be fun, and I had no idea what I was getting into, and nobody did, including George, because the moment George got a whiff of what was happening, he hightailed it back to Marin, and that was the last we heard of him, except when they had to fire his choice for the director because the guy was terrifically talented, but directing it like a movie. And we were already day 2. We were over schedule and over budget. So they brought in Steve Binder, who was a big variety show pro,
Hmm.
and so George stayed out of it from that point on. But I have to say, in its defense, it was not that unusual. I mean, there were a lot of weird television shows in those days. just Wayne Newton at SeaWorld, I mean, that kind of stuff. Really strange stuff. And so it wasn't that much out of the market.
Right.
It was just it was taking a hot movie and trying to do something with it in the variety world. And it's got a respectful rating, and got the kind of reviews where "what the hell was that?" or "well, this was interesting," and then it went away, and then it surfaced on the internet
Mhm.
after the first three movies had come out, and there was a whole what I call Scientology of the nerds. They had made Star Wars a religioso experience, and they felt betrayed by George that he had let this happen, and so they went after him. And I think George got scared. He tried to buy up every copy. He tried to stamp it into the ground, and of course, by then, the it was that the ship had sailed,
Mhm.
and it was too late for all that. And so he kind of tried to ignore it. And then when the next 30 years later, when the new Star Wars movies came out, it surfaced again. So he finally kind of owned up to it. First of all, there was Life Day, which he was the holiday we were celebrating on the show, which he incorporated into when Disney bought his company, and he did a thing for Disney Plus called the Star Wars Holiday Special with Lego characters.
Mhm.
Different script, but they were celebrating Life Day. He never let go of that. So he kind of tacitly admitted to the existence of the Star Wars Holiday Special. But whenever I run into him, he kind of goes, like, like a memory of a bad clam he ate.
But did you have a good time working on it? I mean, at least.
Oh, we had a ball. Yeah, it was hysterical. It was a lot of fun people.
Mhm.
And B. Arthur, who we talked into it because she got to sing, and she wanted to do this number, and it was kind of she had a very serious number in mind, but we couldn't get it, so Ken and Mitzi wrote her for an up tempo thing.
Mhm.
But, oh yeah, Diane Carroll, who was a friend and who I loved, and she got to be sexy,
Mhm.
and Jefferson Starship was on it, and of course Carrie Fisher, who hung out with us because she wanted to do a number, but nobody really saw Princess Leia as a sensitive singer songwriter.
Right.
But she did do the Life Day anthem at the end of the thing, so she did get to sing. So yeah, I had a great time. The only person who didn't have a good time was Harrison. I think Harrison felt like he was there under duress, and but I have to say, when I look at it again, he acted. He was Han Solo. He
Right.
played the scene straight for real. He just couldn't wait to get out of there. That's all. But I think Harrison is kind of like that generally.
One of the wonderful things you just mentioned is you have B. Arthur, Jefferson Starship, and Harrison Ford all in one special. I mean, like you said, it was anything goes back then.
Oh,
It
and
just
Art Carney.
and Art
Yeah, I
Carney,
mean,
yes.
I left that Art. And Harvey Korman, who
Yeah.
was hilarious. Yeah, it was like, there's something in here you like. You'll find it. It's there.
Yeah. One question I have is, and folks have noticed it too, that it seemed like Mark Hamill had a lot of makeup on during it. He seemed to look a little different than he did in the films. Was that something that they were doing because of the lighting?
I, no, I'm not sure. It's a very good question. He had a terrible automobile accident
Oh, okay.
between Star Wars and Empire. I think it was between Star Wars and Empire, and he had a lot of reconstruction surgery, and
Oh,
so he looked a bit different.
that makes
But
sense.
I'm not sure when that actually happened. That
Okay.
might not be the reason. It
Okay.
might, pardon me, just have been the lighting and the makeup. I'm not sure. But
You've
I seem to recall it happened before we did the special.
special. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit when you were in front of the camera, and one of the movies you did is something that my dad and I love so much, Ice Pirates. Uh, he
That's in my book too. Yeah.
Yeah, we love that film, and I think it sort of it got a little forgotten over time, but I see it a lot more on TV now, and I know there's a solid fan base for it.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
how was that pitched to you? What was the idea there?
Well, it was an action adventure,
Hmm.
and and that MGM was doing because they had Robert Urich under contract for television, and part of his deal was they had to develop movies for him. And so they picked up this script, which was a kind of Star Wars thing, but they didn't want to go up against the memory of or all the Star Wars movies. So they wanted to make it a more lighthearted, almost a spoof, what Spaceballs eventually was. So it was neither here nor there. But they brought me in to do that, to fluff up the script.
Mm-hmm.
And in the course of doing that, there was a character named Weird Wendon, the evil emperor, who had gambled away his body and was now living on a series of robots. And they'd move his head from robot to robot. And it was being played by Paul Williams, who was, the diminutive singer-songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
And he quit. And they cast me. They said, okay, you're playing, because we were close to the start date. You're playing. I said, well, I'll never get into the costumes. But I didn't have to, because it was just my head. My head was just moving from robot to robot. So famous for my head. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So suddenly I was in the picture, and I was rewriting it at the same time, which was a lot of fun. I have to say, it was kind of ridiculous, and it was kind of a half-assed hit when it opened, and then shortly after that, cable television came in, and Ted Turner, who loved the movie, had all these channels, and he would put it on all of his channels.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one thing that happened. The other thing that happened was Angelica Houston played an Amazon pirate, and that was her second movie. And her next movie was Preetzi's Honor, for which she won the Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody said, well, we have to show every Angelica Houston movie. Well, there were 3. And this was one of them. And Ted Turner loved it. So it was on constantly on TBS and TNT and all the other things, to the point where Angelica, to this day, says to me, any interviewer who's under 40, the first thing they ask me about is, tell us about the Ice Pirate. She said, I can't kill it. She said, I've had a career. And that's what they want to know about. And Ron Perlman,
yes,
who was one of the pirates, who then went on to Beauty and the Beast and what was the show with Katie Sagal? Sons of Anarchy.
Yep.
He is bitter about it. He won't talk about it. Anytime it comes up, he just says the worst things about it.
Oh, brother.
He's a sweet guy, but he really feels like it's a blemish on his career, and he doesn't even want to discuss it. At the time, he didn't have that career, so sure, why not? Food on the table.
I want to ask about you quickly. What are your hobbies? What do you do for fun? How do you like to spend your time?
I don't have any hobbies because I work all the time. I'm writing and acting, and that's fun.
Right.
So I've never gotten into any. I don't do macrame. I don't collect small bits of string. I don't have any of that stuff. I mean, I'm a voracious reader,
mm-hmm.
but I don't have any conventional hobbies. What can I tell you? I'm still working, so I'm having fun.
And one last question, and it's always a loaded question, but what is you at your best? If someone said, Bruce, what did you do for a living? Is there one thing you could point to and say, that was really me firing at all cylinders?
Oh, wow. One thing? Probably not. But I mean, I would talk about Hairspray on Broadway and 25 Oscar shows and winning Emmys and being a Hollywood Square for 6 years to the left of Whoopi, if that's possible. And I'm sure there's something else that I'm forgetting, but it would be, a distillation of all that stuff. It wouldn't just be, there isn't any one thing where I'd say, this is it, go look, go see, this is me here.
Right.
I mean, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I've just, done enough stuff across the spectrum. When they ask me, when people who don't know me say, what do you do? I said, well, I'm in show business. Oh, what do you do? Writer, actor, comedian, stripper, you name it, you book it, you go.
And we are back. I mean, that's the list of people he knows and the list of people he worked with. It's really a who's who. He is still working. He is still hilarious, doing such wonderful things. And I am absolutely honored and floored that he took the time. I want to thank Steve Joyner for helping put that together. This was just an absolute honor. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And Hollywood Week continues. We have a couple more big shows coming your way. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.